Have you ever gone just a little bit too long without being out in nature? And when you finally do get amongst the trees, once again, what is the feeling that you notice washing over your body? That feeling is a part of being human. And it is something that we often neglect or remove ourselves from in our structured lives, often spent in interiors with right angles and flat walls all around us. My guest on this episode is Dr Prue Gibson, a prominent Australian author and esteemed research academic specialising in plant studies at the School of Art and Design at the University of New South Wales. She's an author, she's an educator, she's contributed significantly to the understanding of the relationships between humans, nature, and creativity, growth, who we are. Prue has profound insights into the intricate world of plants, art, and academia, and they are brought to life in her many books, including her latest work, The Plant Thieves, Secrets of the Herbarium, which document her 3-year exploration of the incredible collection of 1.4 million specimens that's kept in the National Herbarium of New South Wales. It's a journey that explores the human connection to plants, how we rely on them to survive, and how we often destroy them to live our lives, how they could literally change our minds, and how these plants hold the key to our future and our very survival. Unfortunately, these plants also document the tragic history of the colonisation of Australia, as they do contain samples from what the Australian landscape looked like before we changed it forever. The very names of these plants reflect the hard truth about colonial erasure of precious Indigenous knowledge. Prue is on a mission to share the true story of the landscape around us as a part of decolonising ourselves and our institutions. Now, any conversation around colonisation in Australia comes with a warning. We are going to talk about Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people who have died. There are some descriptions of massacres and what became of the remains of some of those people who were murdered during those massacres. It is tough to hear, but I personally believe that it is very important that we accept such things are a part of our history so that we can get about making it right and making a better future for all of us. Thank you for coming.
Oh, thank you.
I'm so happy to have you here. You made the journey to come be with us today. And I'm fascinated in what you're doing, particularly in the realm of like things like psychedelics and stuff. I think that's very fascinating. I've had my psychiatrist on the show, Adam Bays. He's one of the guys that works at Black Dog. Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Cool.
I don't know, whatever lobbying's going on.
That's the story.
Yeah.
The lobbyists.
Is it not psychedelics who are lobbying because they know that their stuff is going to come underneath the similar?
So I think what's happened was that there's this couple who, she's an opera singer and he was an ex-funds manager and they got a lot of money, and they were the ones that lobbied the TGA, Therapeutics Goods Administration.
Yes.
So it went up for approval, I think, November 2022, got knocked back, and weirdly went up again in January 2023 and was approved.
Yeah.
And as your psychiatrist said, you know, you're supposed to go through first, second and third trials before something gets approved. So I think officially, I didn't know that phase 3 trials had started. I thought we were only up to phase 2, according to the St Vincent's in Melbourne.
Right.
There was a woman there doing phase 2 trials.
Well, there's his ones that the ones that he's running at Black Dog at Prince of Wales, just down like 4 Ks from here.
So it's not there yet, but now literally like next month, in 2 weeks' time,
2 weeks from now,
psychiatrists will be able to prescribe it. But they're
not every one
supposed
of
to
them.
be,
they're
supposed to be, have had experience, using psilocybin and MDMA in their work. So, but the problem is that those people that were lobbying have investments in pharmaceuticals that are producing psilocybin.
And this is the part that I am, and Adam was quite concerned about, and I understand as well, is like in researching the show and getting ready to speak to him, the idea of using these compounds and these plants in the treatment of very complicated treatment-resistant depression, which is catastrophic depression, which is horrific stuff, and the ability to perhaps rewire neural pathways in a way that's not been done before, was explored in the 50s.
Yeah.
Yet, because it wasn't very regulated and the drugs were getting out of labs and things like that, it just got shut down.
Yeah, it was that
We lost
whole
50 years of
Nixon
research.
administration. But 50 years, it's got a much longer history than that.
Right.
So there's this really fantastic book called The Immortality Key by Brian Murarescu, who has never tried drugs.
Excellent.
Never tried anything. Like, he's a complete purist, and he grew up with Jesuit priests, and he got into the Vatican. He's done all this research into basically as far back as Plato, Aristotle.
Yeah.
There were psychedelics used in their wine and beer.
I have heard about that.
Yeah.
I've heard about that. And it was was it deliberate, or was it just the fungus that was growing on the crops?
Deliberate.
Wow. But similarly to the way that it's used in a ritualistic way in cultures around the world, there was ritual surrounding it.
Exactly.
It wasn't just like, hey, boys, come on round.
Yeah.
We're going to, put on a Pink Floyd record and go for it. It's like, oh, no. It's used as a part of a ceremony.
That's true. It was more ritualized.
Yeah.
And more spiritual.
Yeah. And
less recreational. But I mean, we don't know that much. So there's all this kind of, sort of evidence, archaeological evidence really, that supports these theories.
Yeah.
But we don't really know anything about how they were used and what the context was. There's very few kind of ancient scripts to use and texts. But that book, The Immortality Key, is probably the best.
Yeah.
Because he speaks Sanskrit, and he's a Greek and Latin scholar.
And we've been eating plants since before we could speak, and I'm sure at some point, there's the was it Terence McKenna?
Yeah.
The ones that followed the cattle,
Yeah.
ate the mushrooms that grow on the cow pads, and they had these gigantic leaps forward in language and things like this. And that part of the human condition might be, I want to feel what it's like to not feel like this for a while. And I wonder, because we seem to just constantly go for it.
It's true. And it's about just, escaping our own egos and drive. I mean, I guess, I've been thinking about that recently, just the whole thing of having such a strong drive. It's, a death drive, really.
Yeah.
How to avoid, for me, it's like my drive is to avoid boredom. Like, I'm terrified of being bored. But there's something that drives all of us, whatever it is, proving ourselves to someone, or proving ourselves to us parents, or having other issues that just get you going and you keep wanting to prove yourself. Is it just escaping death? I don't know. And so that's exhausting. All those drives are exhausting. Me running away from boredom like it's going to, nip at my heels is just as bad as any other thing that drives us.
Being bored's okay. Being bored is where ideas show up.
I know. And the irony is, as a writer, I have to get bored before I get creative. Yeah. But it terrifies me. I sort of, but that's a little bit different though. Clearing your mind and just absorbing information is different from being bored.
Do we have any evidence? You said it's difficult archaeologically to find out, but is there evidence about where the use of plants and trying to find insights beyond the day-to-day, there's water, there's food, there's erg, I'm going to have sex with him and we're going to have more children.
Yeah.
Is there any evidence as to where that kind of thing started with humans?
Well, what I found really interesting is that First Nations peoples all around the world seem to have already worked out these kinds of entities and use them. Everywhere around the world, you can kind of source stories, Indigenous stories, about the use of psychoactive plants, except for Australia. I have had so much trouble finding information. And I've talked to a lot of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. Either they don't have either they don't trust me to tell me, or they don't actually have access to the knowledge, or they're not allowed to share that information with me. But there's very little use. No Aboriginal people seem to have used acacia, which is a hugely developing use for psychoactive purposes. But I can't find it anywhere.
Knowing what very, very little I know about knowledge from the these cultures in their country from people who are elders, I would say you are on the money in that is, but I can't tell you.
Yeah.
And I'm not going to tell you. In fact, I'm going to pretend like it doesn't exist.
Yes.
But it would be nearly impossible to believe that an Indigenous culture
really
that literally lives in a way that is almost the permeable membrane that exists between the culture and the landscape around them, particularly in Australian Aboriginal culture, it's almost non-existent. There's literally no boundary between the people, the land, the plants, the animals. They are literally all one. So it's impossible for me to believe that those things didn't exist. The more plausible explanation is that there's heaps, and yet the amount of learning and ceremony that one would have to go to gain access to those levels of knowledge and cultural learning would be decades before someone would tell you.
I agree with you. Look, there's so many Indigenous mushrooms, endemic mushrooms to Australia that have psychoactive elements. And then the acacia as well.
Like just the random one in your garden?
Yeah, not all of them.
Right.
There's only 11, yeah, but still.
Yeah.
There's about
so I grew up in Brisbane where it was like, nah, bro, lick a cane toad,
Yeah, but this is quite new, the whole drinking acacia thing.
Yeah.
So there's about 11 species of acacia that has this particular element that in the roots, in the leaves, in the bark.
Yeah.
But you just have to know how to take it.
A while back I did a whole podcast where I drew a thread between the colour red, as in the red coats are coming, that the British were using to make their army coats red, and the invention of Wi-Fi, through the cochineal bug, through prickly pear, through the creation of the CSIRO.
Wow.
And I learned, I thought, because I knew the two were connected, but it was like, hang on, what? How? And we ended up speaking to one of the guys that worked on the team that worked on Wi-Fi, John O'Donnell. He's an amazing guy.
Wow.
John O'Connell, one of the two. But during that, I learned so much about how much of our landscape, how much of our natural habitat, how much endemic species, grasslands were just completely obliterated by this plant that was advancing in some places 2.5 kilometres a year. Just astounding levels of growth from this plant. And that's just one example of it's a non-human destruction of Indigenous culture, and when you particularly think about the cultural value of plants and animals and things like this. Considering how late the Europeans bumped into Australia and had a go.
Yeah.
How big are we talking when we think about how much was lost as far as names, as far as usages of the plants that are all around us?
And I was just actually thinking about the B2 bush as well, like the B2 bush and the lantana.
Oh my gosh,
has done so much damage. It's impossible to get rid of that stuff.
Yeah.
So it's so interesting, that kind of, and they're still referred to as alien species.
Yeah, right. Sorry, Costa. Like Costa keeps wanting to tell us that a weed is just a plant in the wrong place. I get you, Costa.
Yeah,
I understand your empathy towards the weed. You are correct. And lantana's lovely.
I love Lantana. I love Lantana too.
Not a great film, but great.
I loved that film. Oh my God, I loved it.
Wasn't for me.
I loved it because a lot of the shots were from within the lantana bush.
Ah, right.
So kind of like that idea of not the agency of the bush, but there was like an implicit sort of just, I guess, an implied agency of the lantana.
Well, I haven't seen it for
as
a long
character.
Time. So maybe, But look, as far as the loss
loss.
Not only the uses of some of these plants or even the species themselves, but the names. Like, what are we talking? Like, what we know versus what is or was there.
Well, there's 2 points. The first one is, I'm not exactly sure what the statistics are, but it's pretty much everything.
Yeah.
That's number one. Number two, I did interview this really beautiful person who is a plant expert up in the Cairns Tropical Herbarium.
Yeah.
And he's an Indigenous man who works with community and then goes to the community, comes back with his whatever they want him to do to work in the Cairns Herbarium. And he was we were talking about spirit plants and spirit animals. I said, "Oh, do you have a spirit plant that's yours?" And he said, "No, I've got my people have this particular spirit animal, but I don't. But what I'm really interested in is the peanut tree." And he started talking about the peanut tree. And I said, "Oh, was that sort of allocated to you at birth? Was that a plant or a tree that was given to you? And he's like, no, it's just a plant. It's just a tree that I'm interested in. And he's like, Prudence, culture is ongoing. It's not static.
Right.
Which was, I know that's really obvious on the one hand, but I guess I thought that Indigenous information was everything that's happened in the past.
Yes.
In a way.
Yeah.
And that it's something that was lost. It never even occurred to me that it's ongoing.
Well, that's the paradigm that I was particularly taught in school. I grew up in Queensland, so the state education system was definitely like, that was a thing.
Yeah.
It was the old, we're smoothing the pillow, that kind of bizzo.
And linear and chronological.
Yeah.
And therefore, once Aboriginal people had been completely obliterated via all the massacres, then it ended. But, there's whatever it is, 800,000 Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people in Australia, plus a friend of mine is doing this work with UNICEF because apparently over 250,000 Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people don't even have birth certificates.
Sad and unsurprising, and also sad.
Not surprising. But still there's work to be done, so there's a lot more people than we originally knew.
So the early people, Euros that came here, they were really riding a wave, pun intended, of we have mastered nature, we can cross the globe, we can redirect rivers and dams and da-da-da-da-da.
It was very churchy.
Very, and God has decreed it upon us to be the ones that saves, and therefore all that stuff belongs to us because a man in a big hat and a dress told us that. It's ours to take, and we are actually doing you a favour by doing this. And let me look. You know what we need here? Foxes.
And it was all really faith-based too, because it was like God will provide. So we can overfish because it's not up to us to decide how much more there will be.
Oh man!
Because you know what I mean? Like all of that, Francis Bacon, the philosopher, that was what he kept saying. God has ordained this. It's God who's in charge, not human. So we can do whatever we want, meaning we, men, androcentric, Eurocentric men, he actually meant. And the same with Carl Linnaeus, the taxonomist that came up with our entire naming system of all the plants. He believed that he had been ordained by God to decide what to do with agriculture. And the effect that he and Banks had on the whole world during that period, and Australia. Basically, I shouldn't lay all the blame at Banks's feet, but I'm starting to learn how much power he had after he left Australia. There was only he was only here for 3 weeks. Joseph Banks.
Get out.
3 weeks. And he's named everywhere and he's revered and like this hero. And so he only went on one trip in his whole life, and that was to Australia. He was only here for 3 weeks. Look, he stopped in Tahiti and, did all sorts of stuff. And then the rest of the time was back in Europe, in England, pulling the strings for what happened in Australia.
So, wow.
Yeah.
So let's get our heads around that a bit. Like the plants that we know as Australian, the colours, the smells. What influence did Banks have? I mean, there's a tree across the street named after him.
Yeah. I think he might have been a real asshole.
Yeah. And what's the evidence that you have for this? Prue, it's your PhD.
Oh, come on. But so Joseph Banks was in the ear of George III. So he came out on this trip. I didn't know, a lot of this stuff I didn't actually know before. He was really independently wealthy. So he lobbied to get on Cook's voyage and paid an enormous amount of money and paid for a whole team of people to come with him, including Solander.
Cook used this essentially as a way of, here's some cash to help us, provision the voyage or some money for the Crown?
I think it was more, decreed from Banks's contacts that Cook kind of had to take him. So Cook refused to take him on a second voyage. Anyway,
how bad are you?
Yeah.
Captain Cook.
Yeah.
Old Flaggy McShooty Pants says, nah, Joe, you're too much.
Yeah, Joe is a bad man. No, look, I have to be careful not to overplay. And push the pendulum back too far. But it does bother me. Like I went to Lincoln last year, which is in the middle of the UK, and it's a university town. It has this beautiful cathedral. And I was with my partner's sister and we walked into the start of the cathedral, and there was this huge new installation revering Joseph Banks as this hero. And there's some really, really, really awful stories about those first encounters.
Such as?
I mean, obviously there were. Well, and not just in the 1770 trip, but much later. I can tell you the story about Amalie Dietrich afterwards, the German collector. Is a really interesting story. But that
Tell me
whole
more about
colonial.
Banks. Tell me more about why was he a bad man?
Well, in a sense, I guess he was privileged. You know, on the way they went to Tahiti, and he just, had sex with all those women. And you got to wonder, how did that happen, and why did it happen? And reading Cook's Voyages, which are I found by accident on my own bookshelf. I don't know whether that ever happens to you.
Sometimes.
There's a superiority, a misogyny about all of those first-hand texts.
Well, they had to. Otherwise, how are they going to morally justify what they're doing?
It's so hard to stomach.
Yeah, but they had no reason to believe it wasn't the case.
No.
It was terrible.
I know.
Yeah.
But they really believed that Tahitian people and that Australian Aboriginal people were animals.
Oh, man.
I mean, there's no other way to put it. It's really stomach churning to read those first-hand accounts.
And so when Banks got here, was he was there a qualification to be a botanist at the time? Did he have a qualification, or did he just call himself one?
Yeah, no, that's a good point. He was a self-appointed botanist, but I think he was pretty good. He did send back, thousands and thousands of plants. Apparently, there was frustrations between Banks and Cook because Cook wanted to keep moving and Banks wanted to be able to be on shore and collect as many plants as possible.
Taking my cuttings, mate.
Yeah. But there was that 3-week trip. So we always think of him as this great imperial, fantastic explorer, conquering the world and doing and he was under instructions from the government to take whatever land he could and claim it. But he was only here for 3 weeks. So most of the, can we call it damage? No, damage is too strong. Violence is not too strong. Most of the violence done towards Aboriginal people and also to just kind of taking whatever he wanted and naming everything after himself was done in the 50 years after that trip, or even 60 years after that trip. So it was all about the people that he sent to Australia on his behalf and everywhere around the world. So his kind of control and power extended for decades after his trip here.
Wow.
So that was when most of that imperial mastery happened.
Yeah.
He was the puppeteer.
Right.
And I don't think we were never taught that at school. No. We were just taught that he was this great hero who came with Cook and
now we have the Banks
discovered everything.
Yeah. Discovered stuff for people who had been living here for literally tens of thousands of years, who probably had names and ways for everything.
Exactly.
So you mentioned earlier, we call it the Banksia. Can we call it anything else? Do we know what it was called?
Yeah. So the thing about the Banksia, so I'm obsessed with the Banksia now.
Why not? It's an extraordinary plant.
It's so extraordinary. And I don't know about you because I don't know how old you are, but I'm 54. So I was born in 1969. And so I was brought up on the Snuggle Pot and Cuddle Pie books by May Gibbs, which are, I guess now, unfortunately, I've had to face the truth. They're really racist.
Yep.
So
that's right. There's a Banksia character.
Yeah, there's the evil Banksia man who steals the white babies.
Steals the white babies.
And it's like, God, that's ironic.
May.
Yeah. May. I mean, poor May. I'm sure she was trying her best, but geez. So there's really interesting article about that kind of erasure of Aboriginal presence or stories in a lot of early Australian literature, which is another kind of form of violence and another kind of form of obliteration of culture, purposeful.
Yeah.
So, but back to the Banksia. I've always thought of the Banksias as really being quite ugly because some of them are messy and scrubby and sort of scrappy, and now I'm completely in love with them. But the thing about the naming is that your Banksia across the road it changes, as you know, so much from season to season. You've sometimes got the cones, sometimes you've got the flowers. It's with each season, the names for the different parts of the Banksia tree change, and a kilometre down the road in any direction, all those names will be completely different according to a different Aboriginal group of people. Wow. So it's really hard to think about try naming. So a lot of the Royal Botanical Gardens in New Zealand and Australia are trying to try name, where they have the Latin name that Linnaeus came up with, and then a common name, which we probably all know, and then add an Aboriginal name. But of course, it's really difficult to do that because there's such a multiplicity of names. And there's this amazing woman called Zena Cumston, who's an Indigenous woman based down in Melbourne, and she was telling me on the phone after I'd written this book that there's prefixes and suffixes to Aboriginal words for plants that also give cultural direction. Right. So there might be like a prefix or a suffix to a word for the Banksia that also says fire, because Banksias need heat and smoke to release the seeds from the cones to reproduce. And it's like, that is so sophisticated to have a word that also has agricultural instruction.
Yeah. And
I nearly died when she told me this. It's like Aboriginal people are so sophisticated.
Oh yeah, it's.
What do we have in English that's like that?
Nothing. The level of knowledge and the level of intimate knowledge of these in 10 square meters of land of the hundreds, if not thousands, of organisms that live about how each one of those interplays is incredible, and how it can, as a culture without refrigeration, how it can keep you alive all year round, how this land, your life literally depended on knowing exactly how everything worked. And I do love that it's a tree, it's a plant. That fire is a huge part of it. And, it's not evidence that we should do cultural burning, but here's this thing that's been here for hundreds of thousands of years, and, fire is the reason that it works. Maybe that's because fire's always been a part of this, and controlling how that fire works might be a way to think about how we manage the land around us, and more so in coming years. That's getting, dangerous. This part of the city that we live in, I'm in Sydney, whereas we're recording this in Sydney, and this bit of land that we live on, and this kind of bit between Sydney Harbour and, where the airport is, Mascot, Botany Bay, fuck.
Yeah.
There's a particular kind of Banksia that's just here.
Yeah.
So surely there's a name that works for that plant that is in this area.
Yeah. Well, you're right, because Botany Bay, or Kamay, all the way up to North Head. So Eastern Suburbs Banksia scrub used to be 5,300 hectares of it, all up and down the coast where we are right now. And now it's shrunk down to about 80 hectares. Wow. There's a bit at Centennial Park, a little bit at Moore Park. There's a bit at North Head and down at Lapa. And there's the Banksia serrata and the Banksia integrifolia are the two main Banksia types that are there, but they're Latin names. So I don't know I don't know what the. Wow. I mean, Indigrow, who are based down at La Perouse, that they will have names. I don't know whether they'll share them with you.
That's fine. We've got the heaps of stuff in our garden from those guys.
Yeah, I know.
Great. They're really
so
good.
Fantastic.
They're super cool.
But I actually volunteer at the Centennial Park with the Eastern Suburbs Banksia scrub. So you can go in. I mean, it's weeding, but sometimes they let you plant.
I'm around for it.
Oh, it's so fantastic. I come out of doing that volunteering feeling like I've achieved more than a PhD every single time. All I've done is weeding.
It's very special.
It's so special.
It's a very special part of the, because, we're privileged to be in this part of the city where we have the space to allow bits of bush to come back, which is always a thing that is incredible to get your head around, that no, it's fine, nature will do it. If humans stop, nature will show up again. I'm
not sure. I've actually changed a little bit over the last few years. So for a while I've been thinking white Australian humans need to back the fuck up and just leave everything alone because we keep ruining everything. But more recently, I've been realising that and this Eastern Suburbs Banksia scrub is a good example. Yeah. Because what's happened is, because there's no fire stick farming or backburning that is being done, and the Centennial Park, used to be the Gardens, has explained to me that it's really difficult because it doesn't really make logical sense, but it's very bureaucratic. They book in a fire stick burning, plastic farming. And when that day comes, if it's too windy or the conditions are no good, they don't do it. And then you have to wait another year to do it. Which sounds like a lot of red tape, kind of, very typical institutional management. But what happens is that the remnant bush, the tea trees get too big.
Yeah.
And then the undergrowth isn't burned off, so it gets too high.
Yeah.
And so a lot of the ground cover doesn't grow properly, and then the banksias can't get enough sun, so they don't get big enough. So in a sense, we actually do, as humans, probably have to interfere.
And this is the thing that, the whole terra nullius thing, they showed up and going, well, what's evidence? Farming, that's an evidence of farming. They went, this is bush. There's no fences.
Yeah.
There's no herds. But if you kind of, get the drone in the air and have a look from above, like actually that whole clearing is burned exactly that way.
Exactly.
And that grass it's been burned so that particular grass grows there. So at a certain time of year, the kangaroos get out of the trees and they're out in the open.
Exactly.
And then it's dinner time.
Yeah.
But that's farming.
Yeah, that's right.
But it doesn't look that way to a European eye.
Yeah. Should I tell you about the black bean story?
Tell me about the black beans.
Okay. So this is exactly what you're talking about. So, and it's kind of, it troubles me a little bit, but Denise
I don't know
Ora,
if having any conversations about this country after 1770 or the Doif can not be troubled.
I've got two really troubling stories to tell you. So Denise Ora, who is the director of the Royal Botanical Gardens, she looks like Wonder Woman. I've got a crush on her. Mm-hmm. She's amazing. She's charismatic. She's gorgeous. And she's kind of powerful. She's got presence.
Yeah.
Anyway, I went in to interview her for the book, and she told me about the black bean story, it was a collaboration between Aboriginal researchers, elders, and genetic researchers at the gardens. And they had been interested in this black bean seed. So the black bean seeds are really quite big, like as big as a golf ball.
Oh, wow.
And they can't really be moved by birds eating them and flying and pooing them out, or wind sweeping them up and distributing them like a lot of other plants get, like the lantana. The reason it's
very common mechanism, or like a daffodil.
Exactly.
Daffodil.
Yeah, daffodil.
You pick it up, blow
exactly.
it everywhere.
So that's how a lot of those plants get distributed. But the elders had told the botanists at the gardens about this songline, which came down from Cape York and all the way across New South Wales. And it was the story of a traveller who had a sack of black beans on his back. So the geneticists were teamed up with the elders and said, could you show us, can we re-walk that songline and collect black bean seeds to find out how they could be distributed like that?
Yeah.
So they worked together, they did this huge trek and collected all these black beans
from
along
Cape
the
York
way.
through New South Wales?
All the way through.
Wow.
A huge team of people.
Wow.
And then took them all back to the lab, and they were exactly the same genetic makeup.
Right.
Which proved, or was evidence for, the fact that those seeds had been carried. They'd been carried, stored, planted, harvested, carried, stored, planted, harvested. So, Denise Ora, with great enthusiasm and great excitement, was like, this is this really good collaborative, cross-cultural project that we've done together, and we now have evidence that Aboriginal people undertook agriculture. They weren't just hunters and gatherers. They harvested and stored and all of this stuff that we think of as being very European. And I was like, that sounds like a really good news story, but I felt kind of uncomfortable for a while. I was like, why does that story make me feel so uncomfortable? And I realised we're just recolonising. And I've recolonised so many times. I've failed my decolonising a million times over. Because what she's actually saying is, we knew these stories, these Aboriginal stories, but we didn't really believe them until we could test them genetically in a lab.
Right. So
as usual, we don't really believe anything until we can prove it or evidence it.
Surely there's a way to, collaboratively, to respectfully applaud and show and like, wow, look at this thing.
Yeah.
This is amazing, incredible. You could literally walk from Sydney to Catherine and never be hungry if you knew the right songs. Fucking hell, man.
It's amazing.
Like, that's unbelievable.
It is.
And that's an incredible story to tell that shows for me the incredible technology and wisdom and knowledge that is just involved in a culture on an unbelievable level of navigation and food and plants and everything. Surely there's a way to tell that story without, being the lady wearing the Indian headdress at Coachella, which is we go straight back to that every time.
Yeah.
There's got to be a place that isn't that.
Yeah, there is. And I've got a friend, John Wade, who works at the National Art School. He calls me Miranda. You know Miranda from Picnic in Hanging Rock.
Oh, my God.
Miranda. So he's just like poking fun at me for being such a colonial white woman. But he said to me, because I've asked him, how am I supposed to do this? Like, it's so hard. I can't not do it. I can't do it. I'm really stuck here. And he was like, no, you're one of the grey people. We need the grey people.
The grey people. And this is, for me, this is the conversation. This is an example for me of conversations that need to be had, exploration that needs to be done, boundaries that need to be explored and set.
Yeah. And breaking down the ones that we already set by mistake.
That we're often too afraid to even talk about.
Yeah.
Because it doesn't get us anywhere. And sometimes for me, if not having those conversations just perpetuates, just because we don't have a way to do this that isn't, at this point, isn't extractive and isn't, exploitative or isn't appropriative, doesn't mean we shouldn't have the conversation and in the best intent, with the best thing in our heart as we possibly can to understand that, look, we're building the steam engine and we are just going to trust that tracks will show up, but we can't not build the steam engine because otherwise nothing happens.
Yeah.
And I think that's a great risk that we have in intellectual places such as university campuses where you work, that we're so afraid sometimes. And that's the place where we should be able to have dangerous shit. That's where conversations with the best intent in mind have to be happening. If we say, that person can't come lecture here because they think Joseph Banks is awesome, then...
No, you're right.
What are we going to do?
That's right.
98% of what that person says might be bunkum, but they might say 2% of something that you go, actually,
that's really
I
interesting.
fucking hate you, buddy, but you're right.
Well, I wouldn't mind that. I mean, I would like to know more about Banks. I think he's an interesting character. But shall I tell you probably one of the worst extractive stories?
Boy, look, what, more better than Lang Hancock and the poison in the well? Because that was pretty fucking bad.
No, well, you can decide.
Okay.
So Amalie Dietrich was a German woman, 1850s, quite poor and quite uneducated. And she married this guy who was a pharmacist, and he was making lots of his pharmaceutical products from plants that they collected. So she learnt a little bit about the botany through her husband. And then they had a child, Charitas, and then the husband had an affair with the nanny who was looking after the daughter.
The classics.
So Amalie decided to fuck off out of there.
Yeah.
And so there was this really rich guy called Godefroy, and he had a lot of money, and he, like Banks, was sending people out in this very imperialist way to go and collect plants, because it was all about whoever has the best natural history collection and can, place a stake wherever they go and get these natural history objects and things, with the strongest. It was like a real sort of sign of nationalist fervour.
I've conquered
exactly.
Yeah, I have control of the land.
Come and look at my herbarium or my cabinet of curiosities, which is evidence.
My greenhouse is full.
Yes, my green.
I am growing a pineapple, which in some cases needed a coal-fired fucking furnace to make sure you could grow a pineapple.
Exactly, it's not very sustainable.
Get the people in the house, the help to tend the fire so the fucking pineapple would grow.
Exactly. So Godefroy was like that. Yeah. So Amalie Dietrich, a woman, 1850s, came out to Australia, went up to far north Queensland, which on her own.
Wow.
So a really interesting woman, and she collected something like 3,000 plants to send back to Godefroy, which became a really important collection for the German museums, the Humboldt Museum, because Humboldt was a German naturalist as well. So she also amassed the best spider collection that still exists today. Wow. So she was an amazing woman. And what she also did was that she had been asked by Godefroy, so it wasn't just her, but she also sent back 8 human skeletons.
Right.
And in some of the papers and documentation around the research that I did about her, she asked some of the squatters up in Queensland to go and shoot some for their pelts.
For their pelts.
For their pelts.
Right.
So these 8 skeletons, as you can see, and apologies to anyone who's Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander.
I'll put a warning at the start of the show.
Thank you.
They were murder victims.
Or they were dug up.
Okay, so like proper grave digging, grave robbing stuff.
Yeah. So it's unclear whether how many were shot and how many she just got.
Right.
But during World War II, everything was sent away from Godefroy during World War II.
Yeah.
And apparently they don't exist anymore, which I'm not surprised, because how do you explain that?
Far out. It's important. I do talk about this a bit in that even the baddest baddie we can think of, they believe they're doing the right thing.
I know. And I'm sure Banks was the same.
Putin thinks he's doing the right thing.
Correct.
And this lady was thinking, oh, man, I'm doing such a good job for science here because these organisms, not humans, these organisms, these creatures here,
they need to be studied.
Really fascinating stuff. I wonder how much we can explore and advance science through this.
Correct.
Let's go. Off you pop. And that's that.
Yeah, the ethics were...
Boy, man.
Yeah, it's hard to start.
To ethics, we were speaking at the start of this about psychedelics and psychoactive substances. We live in an extraordinary time where these things we're recording this at a time we're just a number of weeks away from them being able to be prescribed under quite heavily controlled conditions, but I'm concerned about the permeable membrane between that prescription and, suddenly...
Somewhere in Byron Bay in some strange place.
Byron, fucking, Sunnybank
Sydney.
in Brisbane.
Someone's,
decided to, build something in their garage and that's it.
I really think your listeners should be very wary.
Yeah. Also, be wary that it's not it's not a magic wand.
No, it's just a door that can open.
Yeah.
So you need, I think that you need, and like a lot of these kind of cultural or therapeutic or spiritual processes, like, ayahuasca. You wouldn't want to take ayahuasca without having, fasted and been under the kind of tutelage of a proper shaman who knows how much to give you and when and under what circumstances and when you're ready. So the same thing for all of this stuff. I mean, it's and also it's a little bit different just taking a little bit of psilocybin with your friends and undergoing these quite huge doses that they're talking about.
Heroic doses, as Terence McKenna would say.
Right, exactly.
It's interesting because I read ayahuasca was used very recently, like in the last 2 weeks. There was a plane crash in the highlands of Colombia, I think. Indigenous tribe. They use light planes to get around because there's no roads. And there was a family, and the plane crashed, the pilot died, the mum lived about 4 days. There were 3 kids on board, 13, 9, and I think
really young.
4 months old.
Yeah.
And they were like inaccessible. Like there's no roads anywhere in or out. Mountains, ravines, mountains, gorges, mountains, waterfalls. And there's people out there out searching, and there was there was a word for it. I don't know what it was, but they used ayahuasca, and they tried to say, okay, well, we're going to have to turn around and go back, but like last ditch, let's try to use this thing to see if we can
find them. Oh, that makes sense.
And then they'd made it the night before, and the article, which was written in a very, it wasn't like, it was a very reputable source, like a BBC or a Guardian or an ABC or something like that. Yes, that's where I read my news. Okay, so spoke about the vomiting, spoke about the shakes, spoke about everything. Like, they reported this, and the next day, the oldest person who was with him was in their 60s, and he said, "Oh, there's a little bit left in the pot." He says, "Okay, I'll give it a shot." And he finished it off because he didn't want to waste it. The mixture is quite difficult to prepare. And after the vomiting and stuff like that, he goes, "I know where it is," and they found him before sunset. Was it because
he heard the plants talking to him across the whole forest?
Do not know.
Because I've heard that is a part of, sometimes, the experience of ayahuasca, that like anything that you take like that, where you suddenly start to, like I took a little bit of psilocybin recently and I was listening to the cicadas because it was summer. You know when you hear the cicadas like, woo, woo, woo,
they're telling you the temperature, yeah.
But I wasn't, it's not like the cicadas were talking to me or anything, but for the first time I could hear the different registers of sound.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
So instead of just hearing that one note, that thrumming one note of the cicadas, I could hear like so many different tones and registers of sound.
Right.
And I understand that ayahuasca is a little bit like that you can hear the plants. Or there's some kind of tapping into the communication.
And this is what, like, when I read that, I don't particularly believe that he suddenly, plugged into the mycological framework that exists under the earth, that the trees talk to each other about pathogens and things with the fungus that lives in the dirt.
Maybe he did, in a way.
I can't get there.
I'm open to it.
Sure.
Yeah.
But for me, it's like maybe that helped piece together things that, as someone who's walked through the bush for 64 years,
True.
has seen on the walk, has deduced, and, like a broken branch here or a thing there or whatever, or a flight path or whatever. And once all of his preconceived notions and all the gates and all the, automatic thought processes had been removed, then the answer appears.
Yeah.
I have an easier time believing
that makes sense.
Doesn't mean that sort of thing sounds extraordinarily powerful. It doesn't mean that people should be using it. It's like, I can't figure out what to do about this boyfriend of mine. No. I'm going to take some ayahuasca. No. Like, these things,
they're powerful.
They're very powerful stuff. And when you're talking about, like, to take some psilocybin as a, you're not going to sit down and listen to an Aphex Twin record and go, whoa. Like, you have a purpose before you take this.
Yeah.
Is that correct?
Yeah, for me, yes. I mean, I'm like complete chicken shit. I don't like, I don't like getting out of control. But wanting to write about plants and wanting to write about psychoactive communities of people, I just felt like a real fake. So unlike Brian Murarescu, who's written The Immortality Key, which is all about the whole history of psychedelic plants and drugs, I didn't feel like it was the right thing to do. So I just took a little bit.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Were you alone? Were you happy with you?
No, I had my partner with me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And wow. Was it an effect that lasted, or to give you a different perspective moving forth from there?
It only lasted like 2 hours because I only took a little bit because I'm chicken shit.
No, I would start small.
Yeah,
take a half and see if you feel anything. Take the other half later.
And cacao's a good one. Like, if people are curious or feeling like a little bit spiritual, or want to get closer to plant life, or want to understand plants a little bit more, cacao's good because it's really mild as well.
Hang on, I've got cacao upstairs. Like, how much cacao are we talking?
A lot. So my friend, who's a shaman, I'm not allowed to say what her name is.
That's okay.
She has given me cacao twice, and it's really quite mild, but the first time I try not to drink it all because I'm a chicken shit. And then the second time she was like, sat next to me and was like, drink it all. Then you meditate. And so she plays really kind of nice music, and you cover your eyes, and it's really visual. So it's really mild. It's like just having a couple of glasses of wine. Like, it's not like you're out of your mind at all, but it's just very visual. And it's beautiful.
So I've had, as somebody I know who's Samoan, and they have made Samoan cacao as a drink in the morning to have. It doesn't sound like what you're having. But no. I had it that morning and I didn't need coffee that day. Well, but it was really quite good.
And actually, I've got to admit, like, coming down from the cacao ceremony is not nice. It is like having way too much coffee.
Oh, right.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's fascinating.
I had a really bad headache for a couple of days.
Well, like most things, if you've never had it before, your body's just going to try to recalibrate afterwards.
Yeah.
When it comes to things like, agriculture in this country, we are already dealing with things like, water's a real problem because we need it.
Yeah.
We need it to live. We need it to drink. We need it to grow food. Some of it is used a lot in certain farming practices that maybe we could use more efficiently elsewhere. When it comes to what things we might be able to cultivate at scale, I was saying to you upstairs before, we can't let perfect be the enemy of good. Like, agriculture and mechanized agriculture is how we're alive. We're all here because of the Haber-Bosch process. We don't like to remember that, but we are.
But it doesn't have to be monoculture.
No, it doesn't have to be monoculture.
That's the problem,
So
I think.
pushing forward, and thankfully in Australia, there's plenty of farmers that are very interested in this because they understand this is how to care for their land.
Yeah.
This is how to make sure their land can stay sustainable, and this is how they can, not try to shoehorn this crop that's so not for this country into, but to make it work here, it's just preposterous amounts of things they have to do to the soil.
Yeah.
Like cotton.
Yeah.
So when it comes to using plants that are already here, what does the future look like? And particularly around for our food supply.
Yeah. Oh, that's a big question.
It is.
I know that my cousins who have a big farm out near Coolah are changing their practices completely. So it's interesting that a lot of small to middle-sized farmers are really, and they when I used to go up there when I was a kid, they were always just saying, "Oh, you're a greenie." It's like, what? I didn't even know what the Green Party was. Like, there's this kind of, you're a city slicker, you're a greenie, you don't understand what it's like on the land. It's hard on the land. We've got to slaughter our beef and our sheep, and we eat that. And
tons of phosphate.
And
we're
tough, and we're like, you guys just don't have a clue what it's like down in the city. So it was kind of like that. I loved going up there because it was a very male.
It's very much like saying to a cop, "I pay your taxes."
Yeah,
it's that kind of thing.
It
It's
is like that.
Look, mate. Come on, I get that we eat, but is there a better way to do it?
Yeah, but they have changed so much. So it's just so much misinformation over the years. They pulled out all the weeping willows along the creek because they need so much water. But then what happened was all the creek beds eroded. So the next few times that it flooded really badly. And so the whole line of the creek changed, irreparably. Yeah. Stuff like that, like, as you said before, we're all trying to do the best we can.
Weeping willows are an introduced plant?
They were an introduced plant, and they take up a lot of water. So they were doing the right thing, but they didn't immediately replant
something else.
Not knowing. So lots of stuff like that. But I mean, I know cotton farmers, who've got massive properties that's still growing cotton. So I don't feel very confident that there's enough legislation to make decisions about this stuff.
Yeah.
I mean, we should be doing more, permaculture around the city and in the city and on the edges of the city.
Yeah.
Why can't we just do more of that? I mean, why can't we all just grow our own vegetables? Even people in flats or with lots of people in the flats. Yeah. Even if you've just got a windowsill, all you really need is light.
Yeah.
There's kind of no excuse for not growing some of your own food.
Even just a little bit. What does it do?
Even just a little bit.
How does it change how you look at the world?
Well, for me, it changes my sense of well-being is enormously changed by that. Like just having a garden plot. I've got a really small backyard, and I just plonked my garden bed on top of the tiles. But I can get a lot of food out of that. So it makes me feel good.
Yeah.
And, the students, I teach sustainable design, and I've had feedback from the students sometimes where they say, sometimes we feel like you expect us to come up with all the solutions to all the kind of shit show that you guys have left for us.
Yeah,
I'm like, fair point. But I also feel like maybe now all we've got is to be optimistic, and all we've got, I do believe in I actually strongly believe in grassroots change, like just growing your own little bits and pieces. Yeah, like so many people in their 20s or in their teens are like, what's the point? What's the point of recycling all this stuff? It's just a waste of time. And I understand that position, but what if everyone does it? Like, what if we all just do a little bit? It all adds up. It does add up. So, we've got to lobby, and we've got to be activists, and we've got to, write letters and ask what's happening with farming and, stop land clearing.
Yes.
Stop logging native forests. Like, that's a good start.
Is that
coal mines.
The economic case to log a native forest, does it even make sense?
Yeah, no, it doesn't make sense. It doesn't make sense.
I know that, but I'm like wondering.
I can't remember what the statistics are, but it's sort of like they make 20 cents per tree.
Get fucked.
Something like that. It's just ridiculous. It's not viable. And they're doing it because obviously it's the communities that votes, that make a difference for them in terms of their electorate.
But yeah, there's a lot to be done. But we need to eat. We need to have clothes.
Yes.
There might be other options.
Yeah.
That aren't so destructive.
Yes.
there may be things that might be a little more efficient.
It's true.
Cost-wise. Like, yeah, you can grow this here, but to grow it, you need to truck in this much water or buy this much water or shove this much phosphate into the ground or spray this many things. Like, that's an expensive per kilo of whatever it is.
Yes.
Is there a thing that could be as good or close to it? Are we really that, like, no, I have to have my bananas year-round.
Yeah.
Like, I've got a bowl of bananas upstairs. I know they have come from a very long way
It's so
away.
true. And I think that's the whole sustainability question, isn't it? It's about transport.
Yeah.
You know, it's about packaging. It's about water. It's about energy.
Yeah.
So if you're buying your bananas from somewhere that's really far away and it has to be planed out here, you know, forget it. Stop it. Yeah. We need to.
I know, right?
We need to stop it.
I think about that with. I read once that there's a fourth climate zone on Earth. I don't know how many climate zones there are, but there's like, say if there's 8 climate zones, like all the way from Arctic to subarctic to blah, 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 there's another one, and it's the refrigerated zone. And that if you put all the square meterage of refrigerated space on the planet together, it's colossal. Wow. Colossal. I'm talking about every container, every out the back of a supermarket, every truck that's driving here from Cape York.
Yeah.
You know, with a freshly slaughtered carcass in it.
Yeah.
And it's got to stay refrigerated. It needs the energy required to keep it frozen.
Yeah.
It's astounding.
So you're kind of saying I think you're saying is we have to get better at ethical eating.
Yeah.
Ethical shopping, ethical farming.
But ethical's got such a word about it. It's like I've got a fucking linen shirt on Instagram making everyone feel guilty because they're not me. And that's terrible. That's not going to make anyone want to do it.
No, it's
that's
like
then your mates.
Smug superiority, isn't it?
It's the worst.
That righteousness.
It's the worst. I hate it.
It is. Well, I don't want to do that either.
I hate it. I can't stand it.
Yeah,
I haven't eaten meat for 20-something years.
I love meat.
Oh, I haven't eaten it since the mid-90s.
Yeah,
I haven't eaten any animal products since.
It's very responsible. I've got to stop eating meat too.
I just can't.
And sugar.
I can't, but I don't want to identify, and I've spoken about this before, I just don't want to identify with that. Anything that involves a race to purity, it's an instant turn off. It's like,
it is a turn off.
It's like literally someone knocking on your door saying, can I give you Watchtower magazine? You're like, actually, no, fuck off. I don't want your JW shit. Go away. Like, it's the same thing.
It is.
So to say, we need to find ethical food sources. Like, you fucking take away my steak.
Is it just not needing to know? Like, my partner's daughter literally this week said, do you realise it takes 70 litres of water to do one wash in your washing machine? I was like, what? What?
Really?
Yeah. And then I Googled it was like the average amount is 65 to 70 litres. So, I mean, obviously we need to stop washing our clothes and just no, I don't know what to do.
That's
and this is the problem.
The question is to ask.
Yeah, the question is
to ask.
Well, there's this group called solar punks. Have you heard about solar punks?
Tell me about solar punks.
Well, it's an aesthetic. Because my area is actually art. It's a group or an epoch of artists who are really interested in coming out of the cyberpunk thing. So, you know, sci-fi and climate change fiction. Just instead of being dystopic and thinking there's nothing we can do, it's really utopic. And it's also coming out of Art Nouveau, which is really anti-capitalist. So, I mean, look, I'm not the best proponent, but I like learning about these groups and these kind of manifestos of what we could do better.
It sounds like the kind of someone's been listening to my podcast. That's the kind of shit I talk about.
Yeah.
Because there's got to be a way.
Maybe
like
you're a solar punk.
If you can't get, like tonight, we're recording this on the night of a State of Origin football game, right? And if you can't communicate your message about, hey, this is a good idea, and have the audience that watches State of Origin go, actually, you're right, that is a good message, then you've got to fucking work on your message. Because that's who you have to speak to. You have to speak to that crowd.
Yeah.
Otherwise, we're fucked.
But I'm not sure that crowd is very interested.
It's okay. If you make it worth their while, they'll be interested.
Oh, that's true.
That's right. That crowd, like, they're interested in footy. I'm part of that crowd.
Yeah.
I'm interested in footy.
Sure.
And it's finding that conversation and being able to, but it's very difficult to do in the space of a comment box under a news article. You know, that's the reason you wrote a book. You've written a book because it takes 110,000 words to talk about these people that travel the world and took plants from where they, you know,
probably shouldn't have.
But then you think about, again, like the Colombian explosion. When, like, what they brought back wasn't what we now call corn, but the amount of human involvement that it took to breed those different species together to get what is now sweet and delicious and huge corn. That's a completely man-made plant.
Yeah.
It's like my 2 dogs upstairs. They are invented animals.
True.
There's not like they're completely created animals. They were wolves, and that's humans' intervention in our food supply. Like, I'm fascinated by this.
It's so fascinating.
But you got to talk to people in that way.
I mean, I guess I keep wanting to tell the bad stories. I don't know why. It must be like for someone who says she wants to be a utopic.
No, it's okay.
I want to be a solar punk, but I keep going back to the bad stories like Dieffenbachia, which you can buy at Bunnings. They're everywhere. They've got little variegated leaves and everyone has them. Everyone probably in the whole of Sydney has one because they're really easy to grow. You can't kill them. But they're also called dumb cane because they were plants that were taken to the West Indies to feed the plantation enslaved people because it swelled up their tongues and made them dumb, like couldn't speak or couldn't complain, and also made women infertile.
Good God.
Yeah. So there is a lot of negative stories to this kind of, plants moving around the world. It's not all great discovery and happy, Tahitians having sex with beautiful women on the Tahitian shores.
Didn't hurt Gauguin's career,
Yeah, that's right. But he came much later.
Yes, she sure did.
But the Dieffenbach is a good example. And then apparently in World War II, Himmler found out about the Dieffenbachia and did some research. I've read some articles about this because he thought, well, this could be quite convenient to make women infertile. Jewish women and Gypsy women.
Boy.
Yeah.
Yeah, man. Like,
I feel like it's my responsibility not to be the smug, righteous woman, but maybe to just keep telling the bad stories. And I have to apologise. Maybe I need to apologise for always telling the bad stories.
But it's in telling those stories, you're allowing people to kind of understand, well, I guess this is what it took to have a rose bush in my front yard.
Exactly.
This is how this thing that I call rosemary, which makes my potatoes taste amazing, is doing or what it took to get it here.
Yeah.
I'm sure in the same way that how Australians stole merino from Spain.
And that was Banks.
Fuck you.
That
it was too.
Banks.
Oh, it was too.
He was behind it.
Here we are talking about China can't steal it. China's going to steal our IP. We can't let them do it. Well, guess what? Our country was built literally on the sheep's back.
Correct.
Of the merinos that we stole from Spain
so George
and undercut
III
them.
And Banks were behind that because they stole that first merino sheep.
They did too. Motherfuckers.
Yeah.
Banks, what a bastard.
See? He's not as great as he appears.
You're going to have to come up. We're going to, in the same way that we tried to launch the Easter Bilby, we're going to have to come up with a different name for the Banksia.
Could we?
Do it as a school project. Do it as in a way of like, I'm just like, perhaps, I'm not saying it's like, perhaps you could, in the same way that, just a bit of, I'm fascinated with revisionist history and the idea of like a post-colonial look at things. And as we've clearly been having this conversation, it goes all the way to plants, not just humans and religions and songs and language and space. But perhaps it could be like make a short film, for example, about this extraordinary plant and then talk a bit about, so here's this guy, we changed the name of, Fraser Island. We now call it Kagari. We now call it Uluru, and we've all decided that's a good idea. Let me tell you about Joseph Banks. And then you go, bah, 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 bah. And they say, this plant, which we call the Banksia, lives here. Do you really want, is it a good, because by doing so, you're kind of drawing attention to the colonialist nature of the plants around us. And that might be a way to further explore.
That's
you're
actually
an art,
a really good idea.
You're welcome.
Yeah, because I'm just going to start teaching this environmental art course. I'm going to get the students to do it.
There you go.
Thanks, Osher.
No, you're welcome. You're the best. Thanks for coming by.
Thank you.